Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. And today we'll be continuing our series on building advanced inspection applications. I'm joined today by Sarah Mitchell, who is our Director of Customer Success as well as Head of our Documentation Department. Today's session is also a Q&A session. So if you have any questions about Transform, you can go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also send your questions to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. And in fact, we did get a question in today before we started, and I'm going to address it. It has to do with how to access templates in Alpha Transform. And so I will actually jump into that right now, and then we will kick off our main presentation. So to do that, I'm going to pop over here. Hold on a moment. To my browser. Okay, and I'm going to go over to Transform Central. There's transform.alphasoftware.com. And I've already logged in here and chosen my account. And now if you want to have access to the pre-built templates that we have built, or what we call pre-built form designs, are the same thing. What you're going to do after you log into Transform is you'll go over to the Designer tab. And then once you're in the Designer tab, you're going to go ahead and create a new form design. And you do that over here, or a form type. It's over here in this list. Right now I have a whole bunch of form types that I have already created. But if I want to add a new one, I click this plus button here, see with my mouse, and then I click select template. So most of the time I'm doing add blanks, I'm starting from scratch, but select templates will open up another screen here, which will give you all of the templates. So there are ones for car mileage, for example, and travel expenses. For construction, we have toolbox talks and the project punch list. So we have all these right here. And to get to them, you just click on one of them. Let's choose, I don't know, non-conformance report. And as you'll see, it's now here in my list of forms, and I can start playing with that immediately. All right, so I hope that that answers that question. If there are more questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, or again, you could just email us. So let's pop over to my PowerPoint, and we're going to dive into today's lesson. If you recall, we were building for a person like this who's out doing maybe HVAC work out in the field using a mobile device. And they may or may not have an internet connection or self-service. So we need to count on our applications being able to work offline. So the scenario we pictured was this person is out here and they have a form that we've built in Transform. It has a whole bunch of fields for them to fill out, but one in particular is a scanner form. And when they choose that scanner form, it pops open their camera to scan a serial number. And once that serial number is collected, it goes through a little bit of a process here. It goes into a database, and in that database, it looks into a particular table called the serial number table, and it finds the model ID of that unit, if it's there, as well as the date and service, the service history, and a few other pieces of information. When that information is then filled in automatically, that in turn kicks off yet another process and another database lookup, this time into a model table, where we can get information about that model in particular, such as its name, its brand, its type, as well as links to photographs of that unit so that you could see it on the form, and links to a PDF documents that might contain installation instructions or product specifications or something like that. Some sort of handy documentation, maybe that comes from the supplier, that would be handy to have on the field, even if you don't have an internet connection. So we went through how that process could work, and we talked about how these tables were set up, and we did that using SQLite. We did that maybe a couple of weeks ago, and we built a couple of tables. And what we did is we took our SQLite database, which is really just a file, which we called EquipmentDB, and we packaged that together with some other files. We packaged it together with these two PDF files. One is our installation guide, one is our spec sheet guide. Both are PDF files, as well as an image. Here's the image, SA7414.jpg. We also indicated the target folders. In other words, where on the device we would like to put these. These are relative paths, but when we refer to them, when we're building out our forms, where we're going to put them, And you could put them in subdirectories. The only thing you can't put into a subdirectory is an SQLite, a SQLite database. It doesn't work if you do, but when you set it up, it doesn't even give you an option to do it. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. So here I have one file, SA7414. Remember that, it's going to come up later. And I put that into a folder called images. And also remember that I have these two PDF files, and they are in a folder called documents. So this all got set up so that it could be packaged together. And we did this using Alpha Anywhere this time, not Alpha Transform, Alpha Anywhere, available from alphasoftware.com. It is a free companion product that you can use with Alpha Transform. I showed you how to do it in a previous episodes. That'd be the place to look. But anyway, what we did was we packaged up all of these files, and then we created a manifest file out of that, zipped them all up just by all hitting one button. We didn't physically do this. We let the system do it. And then we uploaded it to Amazon S3. Amazon S3 we talked about last week. Amazon S3 is a cloud storage solution where you can keep your data. And what you do is you set up things called buckets. Buckets are similar to files or directories. You could think of them that way. And when we set it up, we had to make sure that our bucket was public. And I showed you how to do that. Then I showed you how to check to make sure you could send data in and out using a piece of software called Cloudberry. However, one thing I forgot to mention last week, and it will be updated in last week's video, or at least in a note, is that when you send this up, you also have to let them know that the individual files themselves, the ones that we upload here, should also be accessible to the web. You do that using what's called an ACL policy, ACL. And if I can find that slide right here, title slide, I think my slide was around 240, if I remember. Bam, there it is. Yep. You're going to see something called Edit Access Control List. So this is just cleanup from last week's webinar. You're going to want to do this, and you're going to want to tell that everyone should be allowed to list and read the objects in your S3 bucket. We also talked last week about how to lock that down if you want to make sure that only, say, your employees can get hold of and view that data. All right, let me jump back into the right slide here. And that's about right. So we took all our data, we put it up onto Amazon S3 so that Transform could get to it. And we then went into Transform and gave it the location of our manifest file. So it knew to upload those files, or rather download those files onto the device when the device started up. So what are we going to do today? Today's goals are going to be, we're going to do a couple things. If you go back and take a look at the process of what we had here in our flowchart, we have looking up stuff from a database. We're actually going to cover looking up stuff from a database next week. We've covered it before if you want to sneak ahead and look at our Transform Tuesday playlist. But after those things are looked up, we wanted to do some intelligent stuff. And one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to display a picture of the unit that we have scanned to create a visual verification for the person out in the field that they're working on the right piece of equipment. And we also want to display some buttons that'll open up PDF files that'll tell us how to do that. So on today's Transform Tuesday, we're going to talk about this portion here. And the way we're going to do it is like this. We're first going to pre-populate the fields in our form with the file names. So in the case of the image of that compressor or that condenser that I showed you a few minutes ago, remember I said it's SA7414.jpg. I told you you'd be Quizlet about that. That's one of the file names. That's in the database, but we're actually going to pre-populate it in the form just for testing purposes, similar to hard coding it. And then we're going to hook up a control to show that image, which I'm going to show you today. And then we're going to hook up yet this button this time to launch a PDF so that you could take a look at information about that particular unit. So let's get started. So this is a visual example of what I'm talking about. Basically, what I want to do is I want to be able to open up my form. And once I've scanned in the number, it's going to look up in the database and it's going to pull out the image name, SA7414. Now, in real life, when we're finally finished with this, this is actually going to be hidden. There's no reason for the user to know that. But in debugging reasons, it's good to see that things are getting pulled out correctly. Now down here, we've got another field called product specs PDF, and it has got a value that we're going to pre-populate, spec sheet Goodman coils.pdf. And when we click that button, what we want it to do is we want it to open up another window on my phone or tablet and show me what's going on there in that file. Show me the contents of that PDF file so that I can maybe pull out information that I need to do my job. All right, so question is, how do we do that? Let's pop over to Transform and I will show you how. And in the meantime, let me see if there are any further questions. There aren't, but it looks like Sarah has nicely put a link in the chat window to show you how to get the Alpha Anywhere Community Edition, which I just showed you a moment ago. Okay, I'm going to pop down now into my form. It's called TT Inspection Form A. And the first thing I'm going to show you is that, actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at two particular fields. And these are the fields that hold the file names. And these are the fields that later on are going to be populated by our database with the proper file names. So the first one we're going to look at is called photo file name. So this is the field name here. And right now it has a preview value, but that's not a default value. It's a little different. I'll show you why in a second. Preview value only shows up here, doesn't show up when you actually use it. And it's based on this photo file name that we're going to actually display that image on the phone. The other field I want to show you is one that's called product specs. And the product specs field, product specs PDF, contains the file name of the PDF that we'd like to have open when you push the button. Okay, so you're with me so far. There is a photo field and a PDF field. All right, so we're going to go back here into form types where I can see general properties of this form. And I'm going to scroll down, and if you don't see all of this stuff down here, it's probably because you have advanced features for your form shut off. And the way you turn it on is with this arrow here. So I'm going to click Advanced Features. I'm going to scroll down until I come to Initialization Commands. Initialization commands could also be called, say, default values, might be a better name for it. Down here, it shows you how you specify those values. You start out with the field name. For example, we have a field called Product Specs PDF and a field called Photo File Name. Then we talk about the type of data that goes into it, because Transform doesn't necessarily know that right at this moment. In both cases, they're a text field because it's just a name of a file. So text goes next. And then the value that we want to put into that field, the default value. In the case of the PDF, it's called spec sheet Goodman coils.pdf. In the case of the photo file name, there's our SA7414 JPEG that we had before. Now, when it's up and running and going, we're not going to have these initialization commands. Those values are going to be filled in using a database. But the reason we're having these filled in automatically for us at the beginning is so that we can test our work as we go along, make sure that we haven't made some syntactical error or some logic error. So that's the reason I'm using initialization commands. There's lots of great reasons to use initialization commands, though, in production. Like there might be things that you might want to have it default to the current year, for example, when you're filling out a form. You might want to, default to things that are almost always obvious choice. You might want to add into your initialization command. So it's just a good way to set up default values. All right, back into the form design itself. Let's take a look. And first, we're going to take a look at how we showed the photo on the form. So if you remember from the slideshow, I'll go back over here to PowerPoint. We have this puppy right here. So how did I do that? Well, I will show you. In my form design, I have created a form command of an HTML type. So an HTML command. And here is what I put into that HTML box. I should be able to expand this for you so that it's easier to see. And I can, great. And so this is just plain HTML. Hopefully you're familiar with this. This is an image tag. And an image tag is used for displaying an image on the page. Image tags can have a couple of different properties in here. One, which is a required property, is the source. Where is the image coming from so that I know where to get it to display it on the screen. And the other is a width or a height, and there's some other ones you can put in here as well. But I tend to set the width here to 300 pixels, and I think you'll find that that'll work out pretty well for most of the things that you're doing. Now, when it comes to the source, the image file name, this is where it gets, this is where it might look tricky if you're just thinking about plain HTML. So I want to go through this with you carefully, because there are two pieces here which are going to be substituted in. The first one is images. So images dot tells the transform system to look in a subfolder called images. Now you might think, well, the normal syntax for that, Dave, shouldn't that just be images slash? And the answer is normally it would be, but not here. And the reason is because you need to whitelist your directories. And we do this for security reasons. We need to whitelist the paths. That's true if it's a local image or even if it's a image up on the World Wide Web, which I showed several weeks ago. So how do you whitelist a path so that when you type in something like images dot, Alpha Anywhere knows to go look for a subdirectory called images on your phone? Well, you do that back here, not here in the form properties, but over here in the home tab. So here I am in the home tab. I'm going to scroll down to define on-device assets. And this is where we went last week to specify our manifest file. In other words, the file that tells Alpha Transform what other files it needs to download. But below there, there's an on-device assets policy file, which is used for actually quite a few things. But one of them is for setting up these path prefixes. You could also think of this like as an alias. So as you can see here, I have created a alias called images, and I have said that it is a # images slash. That # means that, hey, this is local to my phone or to my device. But here's another one I set up a few weeks ago called alpha, and that one doesn't have a # in it because it's going off to a URL. So if your thing is local, it starts with a #, and then it's the name of the directory followed by a slash. So when I go back into the designer, it knows that when I say images, it looks it up and says, aha, they mean the local images folder with a slash in front of it. So that shows it where to look. But as to what the actual file name is, we have this here, curly brace, $ photo file name, close curly brace. When Alpha Transform comes across curly braces in an HTML command type, it knows that the stuff inside is TPL that it needs to execute. And in this case, the TPL is very simple. All I've done is given it a field name, that field name that holds the photo file name. So I typed in $ photo file name. All right. So what that means is when I come here, I want you to replace this whole thing here with whatever the value is in my field. So the result would be images slash and then that SA7414.jpg that we've talked about so much will get put in there as well. And that's how it got displayed on the screen. So that's that portion right there. We're going to pop down now and take a look at how we did the PDF. So the PDF is a little bit different. If you'll take a look, the PDF is not an HTML type of command. It is, in fact, something that we call an action button. When you create an action button, you give it two things. One is the text that you want to appear on the button. And if you don't, I think it just says button or something like that. But what is critical is that you give it an action name. I think it leaves it blank by default. And if it's blank, you really can't do anything with it. So give it a useful name that you're going to remember. We called this one product specs. So when I click on product specs, what's supposed to happen? It's supposed to open up my PDF. So how did I set it up to do that? I'll show you. I did that using some code, some TPL code, but not very much. So I'm going to go back here, and this is where we keep the TPL. It doesn't go in the form commands. It goes here in the properties for the form. If you don't see custom code listed, again, you may have advanced features turned off. So make sure you've turned advanced features on, like I have here. And then you want to go down and say, enable custom code for this form type. If you say no, this is going to be grayed out. You can't get to it. So you want to make sure it's set to yes. So here's edit custom code. I'm going to go ahead and tap on that or click on that. And what slid in is my TPL editor for this form. Okay, now that I'm in the TPL editor, here are all the form commands. Many of them are fields, but when we get down here, we'll find one of them called product specs PDF, and that you'll see is defined as a button. And a button has this one action on it called a button. If I double click here, it's going to show me the code that I have attached to this button. And the code is really simple. This is the beginning and ending portion of the function that runs the code. That is in fact inserted for you, so you don't have to touch it. The only thing you have to do is put in one line of TPL in order to launch what we call the file viewer. So here in the file viewer, you use the function called file viewer, then you'll put in the path and the file name. Now we know the path already. It's contained in something called documents. So what you're saying is, aha, I see how to do this. I just have to put in one of those aliases right here. Well, not so fast. As it turns out in TPL, you don't need to use an alias. In fact, it probably won't even work. Instead, you could just put the direct directory name right in here like I have called documents. So I didn't really have to whitelist this or do anything special with it. I needed to do something special with it when I wanted to show it in an HTML block. But when it comes to TPL, we have a little bit more trust and we will allow you to put in the name of the file, the directory directly. So the first part is documents. And then I used an and, which is a concatenation in TPL, meaning I want you to take these two strings, this one, and add them together. And then I've chosen # product specs.pdf, and that is the name of our field. In fact, it was the one that we had the initialization command set up on, which pointed it to the PDF file that we wanted. And the end result is when you run this and you click on the button, it will open up. It'll open a file viewer and it will open up the PDF file on your screen. So that's what I wanted to cover today. Let me jump back into the PowerPoint. So we saw last week we went over S3 and I made that little correction about how you need to go to the ACL or ACL section in order to open up your objects. We talked about how you could pre-populate those fields with default values, which is what we did. And then we showed how to hook up a control to show a product image and how to hook up a button to launch a PDF. And in each case, the product image and the PDF came from fields in our form, fields that in our next installment will be hidden because the user doesn't really need to see them. The one thing we didn't do, though, is we didn't populate these fields using SQLite. And that will be our goal for next time. Next time, we're going to use SQLite, and we're going to set it up so that when we do that barcode scan, those fields are filled in using a database rather than pre-populating hard. And again, we should get the same results of being able to still see the image and still launch the PDF. So that is pretty much it for today. If there are any additional questions, I will take a look for them now. But if not, you can always send them to guides@alphasoftware.com. I mean, sorry, to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Well, you could send it to both, but tfservice is the one you went for Transform. Doesn't look like it. Well, hey, thank you, everyone. Thanks for writing in with the question. If you do have further questions, you know how to reach us. I hope to see you at our next Transform Tuesday. Until then, take care and stay well. And thanks, Sarah, for hanging out and supporting us here. Bye-bye.